Welcome everybody to this DCD panel, Lessons Learned While Teaching in a Virtual Environment. I'm Karen Melblom Nishioka. I'm the president of DCD, the Division on Communication, Language, Deafness, and Hard of Hearing. I'm also a professor of special education at California State University, Dominguez Hills, as you can see that behind me. The mission of DCD is to promote the welfare, development, and education of infants, toddlers, and children and youth with communicative disabilities, or who are deaf and or hard of hearing. It's also to promote growth in professionals and families as a means to better understand the development of communication abilities and the prevention of communication disorders. We welcome the addition of new minds and voices, so please consider joining our board as positions open. Get involved in our many committees. We really need you. As we reflect on the incredible year that we have experienced, the DCD board felt that it would be useful to discuss the unique ways in which we as a community address the challenges presented by the lockdown, the isolations, the quarantines that were required in order to stem the tide of the COVID-19 pandemic. As we reflected, we realized that while difficult, we had learned quite a bit, and we believe that in the spirit of the hardships we all experienced, there are some positive things that we have learned as a result. This panel is our attempt to begin this discussion. We have 5 panelists, all representing their unique perspectives. The panelists have been given the questions in advance so that they've had time to prepare their responses. Each panelist will have 15 minutes to respond to the questions. And it's possible that all panelists will not have a chance to respond to all of the questions provided. In the interest of time, I'm going to keep the discussion moving, and I will adhere to the schedule that we agreed to prior to this taping. The chat is enabled, and we will be monitoring your comments and questions. When possible, the panelists will respond. The DCD board and membership owe a special debt of gratitude to Brittany Dorn for her vision. Without her willingness to lead this effort, the panel discussion would not have been completed. So thank you very much, Dr. Dorn. And with that, I would like to introduce Brittany Dorn. Hang on here, I have to go to another screen. Brittany is currently the manager for educational services at the Vermont Deaf and Hard of Hearing program. This program serves over 300 students across the state of Vermont. Previously, she's worked as a college instructor in Colorado, an itinerant teacher of the deaf in Massachusetts, and a second grade teacher in Connecticut. We are thrilled to have her as a member of our board and a presenter on this panel. So Brittany, here's your first question. How has the pandemic, the lockdown, the virtual environment impacted your day-to-day services?
That is a great question. Like Karen said, I'm an itinerant teacher currently in Vermont, and I have about 50 students on my caseload. And in a typical school year, I would be driving a lot. So it was not unusual for me to drive 90 minutes to one school, meet with a student, drive an hour to another school, meet with a student. So the biggest change that's happened for us is definitely less in-person visits as a result of COVID-19. A lot of our work has been done remotely over the last year and a half. Mm-hmm. The other thing that comes to mind is just, as things have opened back up this year and we've had the opportunity to do in-person visits, they've had to be a lot more intentional and planned than in the past. So for itinerant teachers, sometimes our work would look more like I would go to one school where I had a student and then kind of drop in and check with another teacher of another student. And it all was a little bit more fluid and flexible. But certainly with the precautions, because of COVID-19, it's had to change and be a lot more specific and structured this year.
Sure.
One thing that I've noticed too, and have talked to some of my colleagues about, is this big change in our jobs in terms of transition time. So typically for an itinerant teacher, like I said, we would have all these built-in transitions, like driving time between schools or planning time between students. But because so many things are remote now, there have certainly been days where I'll have a meeting from 10 to noon, and then a meeting from noon to 1, and a meeting from 1 to 2, which is great in terms of efficiency, but also can be really challenging because in between meetings, sometimes there's not a chance to go grab a snack and take a little break and regroup for the next one. Mm-hmm. So that's been a big difference this year as well.
Thanks, Brittany. So the next question asks, how have you utilized technology to stay connected with students and student support teams?
So much of what we do now has been remote. One thing that I've tried to do with my teams is a monthly email to everybody with a tip, something specific to what's going on in the current climate. So one example that comes to mind is closed captioning, which has always been really important for students with hearing loss, but has become especially important in light of all of the technology and remote learning that's been utilized in the last year and a half. So what we've done where I work is we've tried to kind of choose these topics and then share information with teams so that we're checking in with them and also providing some resources and some knowledge that hopefully will help them meet some of the unique challenges that have been coming up this school year.
Awesome. Have you found that this has facilitated connections between students, or how have you continued that?
So that was a really tricky question for us here in Vermont. Vermont has a lot of rural areas. So it's, like I was saying earlier, sometimes there's huge driving distances between schools where we work with students. And it can be harder for students to connect with one another because of how far away they live from each other. So what we used to do pre-COVID is we would do one in-person day every year. It often happened in May, in the springtime. And we would basically invite students across the entire state to all come together for this really fun day near a lake where we had all these activities and sports and team building. And it was awesome. It created a really unique space for students to meet one another. And because of the pandemic, that could not happen last year, and it could not happen this year. So what we did this past May for the first time is a virtual meetup for our students. And we had a really good turnout. It happened in May. We had about 30 students attend. We had interpreters, we had CART, we had a trivia game, we had breakout rooms, we had 6 teachers of the deaf who helped facilitate. So that was really positive and was a good way to connect students, and is something that we're actually hoping to continue next year, even once things are able to be in person again.
Awesome. So the last question that we have is, what are some of the benefits that you might have experienced related to using technology and addressing the challenges that faced us this past year?
That's a good one. We've tried a lot as a team here in Vermont to kind of look at the silver linings, because there have been so many challenges that have happened in the past year and a half. So one of the things that definitely comes to mind is just this increased comfort surrounding technology. In the past, we would try to connect with teachers and teams virtually through Zoom and Google Meet. And there used to be a little bit more resistance to it because people just weren't as familiar with the platforms. And I even remember distinctly pre-COVID, like making tutorials about Zoom. What is Zoom? How to use Zoom? How to set up your username? And it's so funny to think back to that now, because we all are living in such like a Zoom friendly world that those things have become second nature to a lot of our teachers and teams. So this is very exciting for us because, like I was saying earlier, our students that we serve are so far apart from one another that it can be challenging to go to one school for a meeting and then get ourselves to the next school for a meeting. So being able to join things like that remotely and having increased confidence and comfort on the part of school teams to invite us to join remotely is really exciting. So we're hoping to do more of that next year, to continue joining meetings remotely next year. And let's see, there was a couple of other things. Oh yes, another silver lining is that it's been easier for our staff to connect. We have 10 teachers of the deaf on staff. We all live in different parts of the state. And so typically we would have all of our meetings in person, and some people would be driving an hour and a half to 2 hours to join for those meetings. And it became just a really long day for some people. And now, again, because of that increased comfort with technology, something will pop up and we'll say, hey, why don't we all jump on a Zoom call and talk about that for 15 minutes? And people are willing and able to do that in a way that they haven't been in the past. So we're looking forward to continuing to have more frequent meetings next year.
Awesome. So if I kind of recap what I think you've told us, and I think it's important, one of the drawbacks was a need to think about planning transition times in between Zoom meetings, even though we're at home or remotely working from our office. But we need to think about our own bio breaks and timing for just moving from one meeting to the next and reframing our thought processes. The positives then are connecting students using Zoom, having better participation and less tired people participating in the monthly meetings that we tend to do. And so that might be something that's a takeaway from this crazy year. Is that right?
That's right.
All right. Thank you so much, Brittany.
You're welcome.
For
Thank you, Karen.
sharing your information, and again, for putting this all together. We couldn't have done it without you.
Yeah.
So our next presenter is Terry Wilding. Terry is currently the superintendent of the Minnesota State Academies, overseeing 2 campuses, the Minnesota State Academy for the Deaf and the Minnesota State Academy for the Blind. And I'm going to apologize before I massacre the name of the city. In Faribault, Minnesota. He's been in the, say it again.
Faribault.
Okay, that was easier than I thought. He's been in the position for 5 years. On a personal note, he is also the father of 3 deaf children who are all now adults, and has been involved in deaf education for the past 30 years as a teacher, a supervising teacher, a principal, and now superintendent. So Terry, we welcome you. We appreciate your giving up your time. I know it's a lot later back there than it is out here, and we really appreciate your sharing your expertise. First question for Terry: how has the pandemic affected enrollment and or attendance at the deaf schools and the blind school that you manage?
Thank you. And currently, our schools have gone through challenges from March to now, making adjustments to our instructional models, from full distance learning to hybrid learning to back to distance learning, and now back to on-campus in-person learning. Through each and every change in those time periods, they had their own challenges. Some people attended well, some students struggled. So we had to adjust and give supports to each and every student in a different way. The teachers worked with families to develop a plan related to their IEPs, how they would meet their goals and objectives, how they would be providing appropriate services. The big change, yes, we did see some students who decided to graduate early or change their plan for school from last year to this year. But at the same time, we also did receive students to our enrollment that couldn't get access to educational services in their home district. So they saw what we provided and they transferred to our program. throughout the year. So it did end up balancing out. We had more students join us than lose. Also, another challenge was the home support and communication at home. That varied greatly depending on the family. Some struggled to get access technology-wise. Some of them had technology skills to help their children, figuring out how and when on a weekly basis to process that. As we made it through the year, it became second nature. There were problems that came up through the year with technology though. Seeing those changes with each learning model we went through, it seemed successful. We were happy to have them both, all of our students back on campus in person at the end of the year. We did still continue to have a few in distance learning for various health reasons, but I would say pretty good overall.
Nice, nice. Thank you. So the next question, very similar to the question we asked Brittany. How have you utilized technology to meet the needs of students during the pandemic?
As Brittany had stated, there was a large state and we're bigger than Vermont, but students all over the state. And they come to our school in a residential campus. They go to school here, they stay here, and then they go back home. So trying to reach out to every student and the family to make sure that they had the appropriate internet, high-speed connections. Could they join classes virtually? The first few weeks, we sent our staff out on a drive around to deliver equipment, to give hotspots out to families to make sure that they could establish those connections. Families had siblings that already had internet access, maybe through their home school districts. We were able to do that. Others, we gave hotspots. So each student would have the appropriate equipment and technology, laptops, iPads, so on and so forth, depending on their age, what was necessary. At some times, there was a lot of planning to drive all throughout the state, test some things. Maybe a device broke, we'd have to send another staff to replace it. Some of them lived probably 6 hours away. So there was a time commitment for our staff to really provide those services. Technology, throughout our programs, we used it prior to COVID. We had one-on-one devices for most of the last school year. So students were already familiar with the technology. Of course, we had to introduce Zoom, and we also had to buy an online management system to assist teachers and students in receiving and getting their homework and being able to communicate with the educators and the families. So there was an add-on program software that we used. Our teachers had a list of apps as well they requested to use to make those videos faster, to provide more resources for instruction. We also, and discussing with the interpreters and the technology, how we had our interpreters involved with the instruction as well. Really, the big change was that we saw students develop their technology skills, understand how to manage and manipulate different tools, paper, Zoom. They processed it very well and were quite successful.
That's good to hear. And this leads right into the next question, and you may feel that you've already answered some of that. So if there's anything else that we're not going to ask that you think would be useful for us to know, please share those thoughts. But would you talk about how it has been utilizing captioning interpreters in the virtual platform? And obviously you have the added benefit of your own experience, but also how has it been for the kids?
Normally here, we use sign language as our primary communication with teachers and students, and we don't have interpreters involved. Once in a while, we've had an outside visitor, guest speaker to attend, and we'd have an interpreter there. With Zoom, we assumed that the teachers would teach the students and things would just process as normal in direct communication. Then we realized, oops, parents needed to support their children at home. So Within that, we had some classes where we added interpreters joined into the class because the parents needed to have the information to help the student participate and do things at home. It changed our mindset. We had to adjust, figure it out, add some interpreters, the interpreters in different classes as needed. And most of the time it was for our younger students. Our older students were more independent, but our younger ones needed that assistance in connecting, explaining directions. If there's an activity at home they need to do, the parents needed to support that. So the interpreter was there for communication access. We also set up virtual parent-teacher conferences so parents could discuss with teachers and ask questions through Zoom in a supportive way throughout the year. That happened periodically, individually and school-wide, how we used our interpreters. For visually, in experience, we needed to learn how to use interpreters better, what screen size worked, like we discussed. Some screens needed to be off. Do we need to spotlight? Is there multiple pins that we need? So teachers and students needed to figure out the best way to communicate and what strategies worked best for each and every classroom and student. Technology that we learned, let alone Zoom and the changes that we did there, we had to process through each and every change and update.
Okay, thank you. That's good information. We have all learned a heck of a lot that we never anticipated we were going to, I think. Let's see, the next and last question that we have for you is, how would you describe the health and well-being of your staff, students, and family throughout the year? Families.
Everyone felt stressed. That's the common answer that we often see. The changes are hard for many people, and some people were comfortable and could handle that technology and were forced to learn on the run. They had to learn very quickly on how to adjust. The stress level had increased throughout the year. Some students, especially, it was a challenge throughout the year. Their communication access at home sometimes was limited or none at all. So the mental health and the communication and the frustration level we saw, it was much more providing online counseling with our mental health team and our staff to really add sessions to develop different coping skills and strategies to our students to navigate their way through their home environment. We worked with families to communicate with them, give them support and resources. We also decided to do weekly informational updates, news and tips. We sent that out to families as well as our teachers and our students. That helped us get our message out throughout the year. We noticed the increased stress, but we gave our teachers more prep time, changed our mode of teaching. So the teachers were able to develop materials, make the videos, prepare, plan online, look for apps and programs that they could use. And that really assisted our teachers, giving them that additional time. When we switched to a hybrid model, some students were on campus and some students were in distance learning. What we tried to do is have the class at the same time, having people watch online. And we learned very quickly that was quite a challenge. The teachers decided to modify it and we split classes. We had a teacher that solely focused on distance learning, and we also had one that worked with the students in person. That reduced the stress level for our teachers. I think what we did is we tried different, what we call Wellness Wednesday tips. We gave people ways to think of their mental and physical well-being and distributed little tips throughout the year, each and every week. The stress levels and changes that we had to make also caused exhaustion. We had teachers that had a lot of responsibility. We tried to give them more supports as they felt that burden on themselves.
Wow. I think if I had to encapsulate what you have described to us, the word I would use is responsiveness. So in order to meet the needs of the students and the staff, first it was getting the technology where it needed to be and learning how to use it. The next hurdle, it sounds like you described, is dealing with connectedness. And so your Wellness Wednesdays and your weekly letters to families and parents, the inclusion of, or the addition, I guess I should say, of interpreters to support the families who were doing some of the one-to-one sort of support at home. And then finally, dealing with stress levels, increasing prep time. I would just like you to come and be the dean at my college. I think that would be awesome. The level of responsiveness and collaboration that you describe is really, really engaging and makes my heart smile. So thank you so much for sharing your time with us. Was there anything else that you feel we should have asked that we didn't?
One more thing I should add, and related to Brittany's comment to student-student relationship and connections. We tried to use our dorm staff. Obviously, our students weren't here on campus. So we implemented evening teen nights, chats, games, story times. We hosted virtual teen nights 2 times the year. That was open to all statewide teens, not just our students, to give them a time to, not school related, but social time through Zoom with support. And the students really enjoyed that as well. So thank you for
Thank you so much. This is awesome. Thanks for sharing. Our next panelist is a student. So it would be wonderful to hear what she has to tell us about what we did right and what we could be doing a little better as we prepare to come back more in person. Ellie Yem is 18 years old. She's originally from Nashville, but she's attending Denison University in Granville, Ohio, with plans of majoring in psychology. She identifies as profoundly deaf in both ears and uses cochlear implants to help her listen and communicate. Ellie, thanks for taking time out. It could be finals or you're just through them. And I think what you'd probably rather be doing is just de-stressing and detoxing. So thank you so much for joining us. We appreciate your involvement.
Thank you for having me. As like I said, I am originally from Nashville, Tennessee.
Nice. Country music capital of the world, right?
Yeah.
How has the pandemic affected your academic and social emotional experiences during the past year?
So like you mentioned, I just completed my first year at Denison University. That was quite a bit of change only because I'm moving to a different state. I had previously gone to a school, the same school for 13 years, K through 12. So that change was also major for me, transitioning to a different school. I will say throughout the past year, academically, I wasn't affected, but socially I was. I noticed that I became much more anxious and scared to make friends, mainly because of boundaries with the masks and just the fear of COVID as well. But thankfully, I had such an amazing roommate who did not let me waste away in our dorm room and made me leave the room. And I am so thankful for her for that. And although it was a struggle to communicate with people because I'm a lip reader, I don't use ASL at all. So lip reading was a challenge, obviously, because of the masks. But thankfully, my roommate was understanding and she would translate for me. Not translate, but she would help me understand what people were saying who just didn't understand that I had a hearing loss.
So you stayed in Ohio then on campus during okay. So did your campus continue to operate face-to-face?
My campus gave the students their own option, their choice to be remote or in person. It was more, they were more easy on that in the first semester because they were more understanding. They said, it's fine if you want to be remote. Our teachers are going to create a hybrid situation. So we have students on remote and people in person. I opted to go in person. Second semester, we had more students come back on campus, and we had fewer classes offered as remote only. So a lot of teachers moved away from hybrid situations if there weren't any students who were online. But if there was, in cases of close contacts or people testing positive, teachers were flexible in creating a hybrid situation for those students who were placed into quarantine or isolation on our campus.
Okay. And just kind of as a follow-up, and I don't think we realized that you were in a face-to-face environment. How did the teachers, when your student, when your roommate couldn't be there to help translate, were the faculty receptive to the needs of the mask issues so that you could read lips, and how was that facilitated for you?
I will say for the first semester, it was a little frustrating because the accessibility center did not send my papers and request out to all my teachers until a month after school started.
No.
So they did not know that they had a student who had accommodations in their classroom until later. But I have been raised to be such a huge self-advocate for myself that naturally I went up to my teachers and would say, hey, I'm deaf. In times like this, I will need more help. In my own way, I would sit in the front of the class right by the teacher because we had small classrooms. So it was easier for me to understand them, that was one of the main reasons why I chose Denison, because it's a smaller campus, it's a smaller university, therefore the classroom size will be smaller. There'll be less chances for distractions or outside noises that will prevent me from hearing the teacher. But the second semester, it was much easier. My papers were sent out on time before classes started, and all of my teachers were aware that I had hearing loss. And I was lucky enough to have at least one friend in every single class. So sometimes we were able to compare notes if I did not hear something.
Nice. What were, and this is sort of a segue, you really started talking about this. Describe some of the challenges with accessibility that you faced this past year as a result of the pandemic.
Mainly, like I said, the delay in the papers being sent to my teachers the first semester was kind of irritating in my opinion, because as a student who has a disability, it's hard it was upsetting to know that I was not sorry, I'm losing my train of thought here. But like I said, that was a little hard. The masks were a big thing. I did not want to pressure the teachers into changing into face shields if they were not comfortable doing that. So I always told my teachers, if you're not comfortable doing that, that's totally fine with me. Just be more acceptable and allowing me to reach out to you more often.
Okay.
My school did struggle with providing videos with closed captioning. But all of my teachers have said that this video doesn't have closed captioning, but please let me know if you need to understand what is happening in the video, and we can talk after class, which is great. I've always had that similar situation throughout my years at school back home in Nashville and in Granville, Ohio. That's just my main reason, because since I don't use ASL, it's harder to communicate, but since ASL is a language with the hands, I don't use it. Therefore, they did not need to get an interpreter. So it was harder for me to listen and communicate with people without having that anxiety of messing up or not hearing correctly.
Can you think of some things that might have made it easier for you? That they could have done?
Definitely more access to closed captioning videos. because I had a few classes that did show a lot of videos, and with the way the room was set up, the speaker sound was not the greatest. So either it'd be too loud or it would just not be where I needed it to be. And that was just my main concern. Other than that, I had a great year at Denison.
That's good.
Because as someone who is not stereotypically deaf, I don't need a lot of accommodations, but that not being within that stereotype has also given me a lot more anxiety of not representing the deaf community as well, and for people not believing me for being deaf. So I'm more scared that they won't understand me because I don't sound deaf, I don't look deaf, and I don't act deaf. And as harmful as that stereotype is, it's annoying to know that I keep myself held back because of that. And in the future years, as we learn to manage COVID and future outbreaks, I need to realize that people are going to be more accepting and realize that I need a little more help.
Sounds like your DSS could use your insights.
Thank you.
It would be nice if they had a work study position so that you could go and advocate for the bulk of students. So we've talked about some of the challenges. What were some of the strengths or benefits that you may have been engaged in as a result of whatever remote learning you may have encountered?
Well, for me, my main interaction with remote learning was my last few months of senior year high school. And now at the time, though, everywhere we were all just trying to figure this out together. Mm-hmm. So it was a little harder to learn and remotely because sometimes my teachers would cut in and out, or they wouldn't speak very well. Their microphone wasn't working well. That was hard. And personally, for me, I've also been diagnosed as a child with ADHD. So I get distracted very easily in an environment where I don't have anything to do. So that prevented me from actually listening, focusing. But as that was a year ago, and that's weird to say that it's been a year, but the benefits of remote learning for me, and based on what I've experienced, is the fact that there's no masks. You can see people. And now that Zoom has the live closed captioning opportunity, I think that's very beneficial. Unfortunately, we didn't have that at the beginning when I needed it. But as I have learned to adapt in many situations, and I have learned to adapt in a COVID situation, both remote and in person. And I can see there's a lot more ways for places to improve, for Zoom to improve, to be more inclusive and have equal access for all people with disabilities. But other than that, that's all I really have to say about the benefits of virtual learning.
Thank you so much, Ellie. So if I could recap, it sounds like the stresses that have come up for teachers and other students from our previous presenters is something that you also encountered. Some of it having to do with some anxiety because you know you're a lip reader, and there may be misassumptions about what your needs are when you present as deaf, but are not somebody who signs. So additional anxieties and stresses that way. Unfortunate that DSS wasn't Johnny on the spot that first semester, but I'm so glad that you self-advocated and got what you needed so that second semester went well. And thank you for sharing the concerns about closed captioning, because we as educators know that that is a continuing issue.
Definitely.
And the access to all of what we post online, not just with closed captioning, but with voiceover for those who are not able to see and those kinds of things. The access and accessibility is really important.
Yes, it definitely, to touch base on the closed captioning a little bit, what's more upsetting is that over the pandemic period, YouTube has actually taken off closed captioning for a lot of their videos. So creators actually pay to put their closed captioning on. So a lot of the videos that my professors would try to play, the closed captionings were auto-generated, and those are not correct.
No.
So creators now have to pay to put their closed captioning on their videos, based on what I've read. And that's just very upsetting for me, because
Sure.
that's discriminating against individuals who are deaf.
Yes.
It makes it harder for a learning purpose and entertainment purposes.
Sure. Absolutely. Thank you for bringing that up. And again, thanks for your time and your contributions. We so appreciate it. We hope you will join CEC and join DCD. We have a special undergraduate rate coming, so look for that information in July, and we hope to see you as an active member of our community.
Thank you for having me.
Oh, we appreciate it. Our next presenter, Candace Emerson, is a parent guide and advocacy program coordinator with Nevada Hands and Voices, a nonprofit organization that provides unbiased support to families with deaf and hard of hearing children. She is also a parent representative on the Nevada Interagency Coordinating Council and Special Ed Advisory Council. She's a proud mom of two amazing sons, Ethan, age 9, and Jacob, age 5. Both of her sons had early intervention services for their unique needs, and now they receive special ed services at their schools. Her oldest son, Ethan, was born with a hearing difference, and that is what brings her to the role as a panelist sharing the parent perspective. So welcome, and thank you so much for giving up your time and sharing your perspectives with us. So, how have the child service models changed, and how has this impacted your family's routine? Of course, within the confines of the pandemic challenges.
Thank you so much. Thank you for having me today. And yes, absolutely. It changed a lot. And yes, definitely in the beginning, you know, when this all started to happen last March, it was very much like, okay, we'll adapt. Okay, we'll adapt. This can't last too long, 6 weeks, 8 weeks, you know, and then it was like, okay, finally summer is here. So everything kind of slows down in the summer as far as, you know, services and whatnot, more relaxed mode. But when August hit and it was time to go back to school for my son, who is has a hearing difference, is Ethan. It was time for Ethan to go back to school. It was a challenge, definitely. Mainly a lot that has been touched on today, you know, with the closed captioning. Auto-generated captions are very, very difficult. And especially in a room of 8-year-olds online, you can imagine the distractions, and they're not speaking into the mic. And then he's just very frustrated. And then as far as, you know, the actual services, you're done with school all day, and then, you know, it's time to sit with your teacher of the deaf or your speech therapist. There's no interest. He's tired. You know what I mean? It's been a long day. But I will definitely say I saw a resilience in him build that I have not seen prior to this. And he really went out of his way to try to connect with providers and service delivery professionals in a way that was hard, because the relationships, my son also has dual diagnosis. So he is on the autism spectrum and has sensory processing. So these connections that were made in person prior were very vital to a kiddo like him. So it was hard, definitely, as far as watching him go through that. But as things started to open up and, you know, he was able to test at school or get some services at school, I saw a huge improvement. As far as family impact, my life basically revolved around his schedule, which I was fortunate to be able to do working from home. But as a single parent, that's really difficult. You know, there's always an alarm going off for someone's class to log into something. But it made us closer in a way. You know, we had like written out poster boards of everyone's schedule, both of my sons, mine. But it was definitely challenging. But there was good and bad. You know what I mean? Definitely.
Awesome. Thank you for sharing that. Would you have any suggestions for parents, teachers, based on your experiences and what you might do differently, or what you might wish they would do differently in future?
Absolutely. I think my biggest suggestion, I reflected on this question, my biggest suggestion would be to remember that everyone's doing the best we can,
Right.
professionals and parents. I had to tell myself that multiple times.
Mhm.
IDEA and the laws surrounding special education were not written for times like this.
No.
They're not pandemic proof.
Mhm.
So with my own family and the families that I work with, I just have to always keep that in the back of my mind. It's very, very seldom that anyone's, not doing the best they can in these situations.
Right.
And really to ask for help. It's okay. I got to a point where we were in survival mode. Like I could not do one more Zoom meeting. If it wasn't like a service that I knew my kids needed, or a social aspect for them to connect, online with their friends and whatnot, I couldn't do it. It was time to turn off screens, to, have family time, the three of us. It was setting boundaries really helped a lot, a lot for us, as well as, keeping an open mind and asking questions. Don't be afraid to ask. There's no such thing, even prior to this pandemic, there is no such thing as a stupid question. We don't know what we don't know, especially now. Everything is different. So ask questions and keep an open mind.
Yes. So those are really good takeaways. We're doing the best that we can. Trust each other. And when you have to step away, step away. And when you need help, ask for it. Yeah. What have you learned from the experiences of this past year that will positively impact your child family interactions, collaborations in the future?
Definitely. That anything can be adjusted. I'm a very type A person. I have notes. I already, wrote my answers to these questions. That's just how I operate and how I do well. That's not par for the course in a global pandemic. That's for sure. So anything can be changed, adjusted. Anything can be done from home. That's for sure. As far as work or school, we can change in any way. And like I said, I touched on prior, I've seen this resiliency in my kids that I definitely was not aware was there. As parents, we try to make everything as comfortable as possible for them. This was anything but comfortable for all of us.
Right.
So to see them grow through that discomfort was really inspiring to me as their mom.
Nice. Anything else that we should have asked that you'd like to share with us?
Definitely. I think one thing that I noted down here as well, generally, I have come from a role of advocacy with Ethan and, being his voice, but really he had to take over the self-advocacy. I didn't know what he was missing. And, as the reopening started to happen and he was back in the classroom, to see him come home and say, Mom, I can't hear what the kids are saying with their masks on in class. So we had to add an accommodation I would have never thought of. The teacher repeats what the students say when they answer a question in class now, because, with his hearing aids and the sound assistive technology, he used to, have fine access, but with the masks, that barrier is, like Ellie touched on, really hard for him. So he came home asking for that and basically wrote his own accommodation at 8. I was like, wow.
Awesome.
Really impressed.
Awesome.
Yes.
Yeah.
So try to listen to your kids if, they say something, especially during this time. And then I tell him now, he actually just turned 9 yesterday. I'm like, you're 9 now. If there's a problem, you offer me the solution. So that, I don't think that would have been such a fast track to self-advocacy without that. And then I think too, self-care, him having time to just decompress, and YouTube was, like the videos that, the little video game videos that the 8 and 9-year-olds watch. I just let him, be a kid.
Right. Right.
Survive.
Nice. Well, thank you so much for your perspective. I'm so engaged to hear how Ethan was empowered by this experience to self-advocate at such a young age. It speaks to the need for us to engage kids in the IEP process as early as possible. It's part of the law. We don't see it happening nearly as much as it should, but if an 8-year-old can identify a problem and a solution, holy moly, we need to get them engaged and involved so that they can drive their future. Thanks so much again for your time. We really appreciate it.
Thank you so much. And I agree. Absolutely.
Awesome. Our final presenter, Dr. Debbie Lively, is going to present the early interventionist home visit perspective. Debbie is a professor of teacher education and the director of clinical experiences at Saginaw Valley State University in Saginaw, Michigan. Prior to joining the faculty at Saginaw, she spent 29 years in public education. She's currently CEC's Interdivisional Caucus Chair, IDC. She is also the Children's Action Network representative for our division, DCD. She is a Sky High national trainer. This is a parent infant program for deaf and hard of hearing. Debbie was the host for the Ready, Set, Grow TV show, in which each episode explored the developmental stages of infant, toddler, and preschoolers using the ages and stages questionnaires. She believes that early intervention does, in fact, make a difference, and it is the responsibility of the community of educators to provide the best resources possible for families with young children. So, Debbie, thanks for making time in your schedule. I should also say she's a past president of DCD, so I have learned lots from her, and I am appreciative of that as well. So, Debbie, how has the pandemic affected early childhood service models?
Well, after you said my bio there, I'm thinking, wow, this is a really old person. I never in my wildest imagination would have thought that I would have lived in a pandemic. I do remember polio, but this just seems to be more horrific. It really has impacted service delivery models. It's caused us as early interventionists to look at varied approaches to support families, including those virtual online visits, more phone calls, preparing videos, using the YouTube approach, texting, getting paper packets together, dropping them off at homes, having regular check-ins, and some families have really suspended their visits. I think that families overall are feeling a bit overwhelmed. And I think that families, programs will try to convey what they're doing. And for families, that seems to be enough, no matter what it is. It just seems to be like there is sort of this suspension going on, that we are getting some services and we're going to do the best that we can with that. I think families, there are concerns about, and this has been talked about, with the mental and physical health for the staff, as well as the families and the children. We've seen a lot of concern with children. Many families are unfamiliar with the technology, and the learning curve is so high for some of these platforms. And some of the platforms that have been used by a lot of people throughout the country have been Zoom, WebEx, Loom, Google Meeting, Teams from Outlook. Home visits tend to be less than an hour when you're working in a virtual platform, which is a little bit less than what they typically are. But a lot of service providers are providing videos to demonstrate certain skills, like how to use a visual schedule, or how you might expand a child's language, or how you might do an indirect correction, or just different little things that will be helpful to parents. The idea of demonstrating this in videos, that's happened as a result of the pandemic. one of the things and it was alluded to earlier, was that it's hard sometimes to develop in a non-face-to-face situation that trust that is so essential when you're a home visitor. And so I think that is absolutely been problematic, is that whole relationship building, although it can be done in a virtual space, and we found that out, but it is just different.
Yeah.
And it's in a lot of the early interventionists are feeling a little uncomfortable. They're feeling more comfortable now since we've been doing this for a year. But initially that was a big piece. How do I build that relationship with families? So anyway, so those are some of the concerns.
Thank you. So the next question is, how do we transition to the new normal?
Well, very carefully. No one's really certain how we should move back into homes safely, which that is concerning. But one of the things we want to make sure that we follow all the health guidelines for participating or canceling a home visit. We want to be clear with families, if they have any symptoms, colds, runny nose, headache, all those symptoms, please let us know. We will look to quarantine for 14 days. We have to be just very, very careful, make sure we follow those health guidelines. We might want to start by alternating visits, have a virtual visit, have a face-to-face visit, go kind of like that. Start out small, maybe one face-to-face visit, not just to say, hey, we're changing it, this is the way we're doing it. But transitioning, just like we transition children into different activities. We want to make sure that the state stay-at-home orders have been lifted, that the number of confirmed COVID cases are down in states and counties, and that the directive for social distancing has been lifted, because we don't really want to, it's difficult in some homes. You don't have that social distance ability in certain environments. So that directive would need to be lifted, and we'd want to make sure that the State Department of Education for each state has approved return to school for its district school systems. But still, in a home visiting environment, it may look a little bit differently. So we transition very carefully.
Very carefully. I'm going to flip your questions around if that's okay.
Yeah, that's fine.
Describe the biggest challenges presented by the pandemic.
Well, the biggest challenges in working with homes is really the lack of devices has been a major issue. Wi-Fi, internet access, that has been a major issue. You can provide a device, but even sometimes internet access isn't really that good. Even when you provide little devices where they can connect to the internet, it's on and off. It's been difficult. That has been the biggest problem. Some programs have provided like HDMI cables so that TVs can be used rather than phones or devices with small screens. That's another thing. I've been doing home visits actually with a family out in California, Karen, and I've been doing it with my phone, and it's difficult. I mean, and the parents are wonderful, and they get all these shots and stuff, so I can see this child and listen to this child, but it's just really difficult because it's such a small, we use our phones in order to communicate. So it's really the devices and lack of Wi-Fi, and making sure that all families have access to the internet. I know one district with their families, in rural areas, it seems to be the most challenging. The school put school buses with Wi-Fi, like in neighborhoods, kind of in areas, and so that families could drive up and be close to the school buses so they could connect to the internet. I mean, I just think
I did a lot of that. Yeah.
Yeah, you have to just be really creative. And I think as a result, I think that there are better connections now than when we started. When we started, it was like, oh my goodness, we were at a loss. And I think the challenges too, like when you look at the 3-year-old that is in a school-based program, the idea of them having to wear masks, or they're doing remote and they're on the internet. That's not really an acceptable way for young children, 3-year-olds, to be on Zoom calls.
Right.
We don't want, I mean, we're kind of going against what our gut tells us and what the American Academy of Pediatrics says children under the age of 2 should not even be on devices. And now we're saying, well, okay, is that okay for a 3-year-old? Not really, but yet that's the way we're, providing services. So that has been a huge challenge ethically for a lot of early interventionists for that child that transitions from a home-based to a school-based program at around 3. So.
Thank you. So our final question for you, Debbie, is what were some of the successes or silver linings that occurred in your practice during the pandemic?
Well, I think, there are good things that have come out of this horrific situation. And one of the things that I think the biggest thing is that that there's more coaching. As a home visitor, my role is to help coach a family, not tell them do this, do that, or it's to coach them. And when you're in a face-to-face, and a lot of home visitors were taking in their toy bags into home intervention, and we've been saying all along, no toy bags. You have to use what's in the environment, work with the family, coach the family. And this using a virtual space has caused that to happen more than our in a face-to-face environment, because we can't bring our toy bags in there. We have to use the parents. The parents, we're working with the parents. The children are not engaged with the screen, but we are with the parents, and they have to participate more. So the coaching, I think, has been a big benefit. And I think it's helped early interventionists learn how to do better at that. Mm-hmm. I think that we have families participating more in the assessment process so they can get a better handle on exactly what their children are doing in relationship to other children, or what's developmentally appropriate, because they have to be more hands-on with that process. Mm-hmm. We can reach families who we maybe had difficulty reaching before due to distances, or families that have difficulty because they have so many other appointments. Mm-hmm. They don't have to get up, get dressed, go anywhere. They can just be there and turn on the computer. I even find that for myself. I can see more families. We can be more productive in the day by reducing that travel time. We can involve more than the immediate family, like grandparents can be involved, aunts or uncles, or whoever need to be, the family wants involved, can be involved. Definitely from a program perspective, has saved tons of money in transportation costs and that we pay for home interventionists. It's caused us to consider a flexible and broad buffet of service options for which families and service providers may choose. It's not just one way. Mm-hmm. So it really, the other thing I think we've seen, it's really caused better collaboration between ancillary staff, like, with SL, speech and language pathologists, OTs, PTs, other early interventionists. Many service providers are coming together nationally that they never did before to talk about the problems and how they're working through some of these challenges. It's provided opportunities for families to join groups connect with other families that have children who are deaf or hard of hearing. This is a silly one, but it's true. It's instituted more hand washing at entry and exit of each visit. I always, when I went on home visits, always asked if I could wash my hands, and then because I never wanted to touch the baby or that unless my hands I had washed. I wanted to model that behavior, but the pandemic has really encouraged that. And I think when you look at that 3-year-old child that's just going into school age, that they're so much more involved and know more of what's happening in the school classroom. What is the morning message? What happens at morning message? Right. They get it. What's a visual schedule? They get it because they're participating with their child. So I think there have been some really, really positives. And I think that's a good thing, because if there weren't any positives, I guess I would just say I'm done. Mm-hmm. But because there have been some really good things for us to look at and think of being more creative, that has been kind of exciting. So
thank you. So I'm going to try and sum up. The challenges that I heard were somewhat universal. The stress, seemed to be a thread across all of the discussion from our participants, that anxiety and stress related to things like, will the technology work? Do I know how to use the technology? Will I be able to utilize the technology to understand what's being said? How will the closed captioning work? All of those kinds of things seemed a universal concern. Other challenges with figuring out how to do the work that we had done before in a face-to-face environment, and pivoting on a dime, so to speak, to be able to use the technologies that we were learning as we also adapted our practice to engage kids as teachers, for students to be engaged. And I think the one thing that I heard over and over, and it really started with Brittany and Terry, was this resilience, this listening, paying attention to the kinds of issues that were arising that we hadn't anticipated, because none of us ever imagined being in the kind of situation that we have existed in for the past 18 months or so. And that to me is really a powerful, positive kind of a thing, that we were confronted with some incredibly bad potentials. We had a pandemic that we had to adapt to. And as human beings, we figured out how to make it work in a less than positive environment. And again, as a positive, we're taking away some things that we don't have to throw out as a result of going back to a face-to-face environment. The idea that we could use Zoom and continue to work for our visits in somewhat of a hybrid kind of an environment. So sometimes we'll be online and interacting, and other times we'll be face-to-face, that we can reduce our commute, but that we need to pay attention to personal time and self-care, and not back-to-back our meetings, so that because we're in a Zoom environment in one place, we don't provide those breaks for us to sort of transition from one place to the next, or one thought process to the next. I've learned a lot from all of you, and I so appreciate your sharing. I'm looking at the chat. I don't know if there were questions for the panelists. Nope, just says good information. Brittany, did you want to kind of wrap this up? I want to thank everybody again, Brittany, for putting this together, all the panelists for your thoughtful insights and your willingness to participate. And those of you who joined us, thank you so much for coming and listening. I hope you'll share the link to this once it's posted, so that others who might benefit from the information that was shared by our presenters is available to more people. Brittany, take it away.
Thank you, Karen, so much for moderating and doing such a nice job. I do want to reiterate, thank you to our panelists. It was so fabulous to have each of you talk and share each of your different perspectives. I learned something from every single person. And I know that in this remote learning world, kind of the last thing you want to do at 7 p.m. is jump on another Zoom call. So we extra appreciate that you took the time to join us today. And thank you to the people who joined us for this event as well. Like Karen said, we will be posting this recording afterwards. So if there's something that you want to revisit or listen to, please, we invite you to rewatch and to listen to panelists and get that good information again. So I think I want to close with that. It's just a lot of gratitude for the people who shared today, and also the people who came to listen.
Yes, thank you.